Hey folks, this is JR with DIY Prepper. Welcome to the channel, and today we're going to be talking about something that every prepper should have, and that is a bug-in plan. Bugging in is probably going to be the way to go in most types of situations. So it's important that you have all the pieces in place ahead of time so that if you have to bug in suddenly, you'll be able to do so without having to scramble and gather supplies before you do. One of the first things that you need for a good bug-in plan is a lights out kit. You could use it for just a simple overnight power outage, and many of those same things would be very useful in a more long-term situation. So your lights out kit is going to include things like flashlights and headlamps, but also lanterns for inside of your home. I prefer LED lanterns in most cases, but if you want to have things like oil lamps, make sure that you have additional fuel for that, additional wicks. Then think about climate control. If you experience a situation in warm weather, how are you going to keep your home cool? I just did a video on that a while back, staying cool during summer power outages. A great way to do that is just with battery operated fans. They can be fans that you stick on a floor or on your table, or you can get a tent fan and hang it from your ceiling using some paracord or maybe a plastic chain, so that you have just like a little mini ceiling fan. Then also you need to think about how are you going to stay warm during a cool weather power outage. Things like buddy heaters are a good option for that, but also with those you're going to be limited with the amount of fuel that you can store. 1 pound propane bottles, they're not cheap, and storing a bunch of 20-pound propane cylinders, it's going to cost money too. So of course you want to have things like blankets as well, have things that you can use to cover windows to prevent drafts from getting in as well. One very big area of concern when it comes to bugging in is physical security. Various disasters are going to see people get more angry, violent, and desperate, and you need to be able to protect your home and the people inside from those threats. And a good place to start with that is to harden the entrances to your home, starting with your doors. And you can add things like door reinforcement kits to those to make them a little harder to kick in, and it might not be a bad idea to pick up some barricade brackets as well. They're just basically sturdy metal pieces that bolt into your studs on either side of your door so that you can slide a 2x4 in between them to make it harder to open that door up. And then as far as windows, you can add security film to those to make them a little bit harder to break through. The windows will still break, but they'll hang together, making it take a little bit more time for somebody to get through them so that you'll have more reaction time. And while modern home security systems are great, I think if you could afford one, they're a great idea to have one. It's important to understand that with those, if we're dealing with a situation where cellular, landline phones, or internet is out, or the power goes out, those systems aren't going to be operational anymore. So it's good to have some off-grid alternatives to those. Battery-operated motion sensors, they're a good choice for that because they're not dependent on those systems. As long as you have batteries in the sensors that are working well and you have some battery stored that you can put in the base station inside of your home, then that's going to continue to work and let you know if there's activity going on around your property. Even just the cheapy magnetic door and window alarms, they're great to have on hand just as a backup to those security systems or as a primary security system if you can't afford a full setup. Then as far as weapons go, have the best that you possibly can. The best that you can afford, have the most effective weapon that you can based off of where you live. And make sure that all of those are in good repair. Make sure they are well maintained, oiled, sharpened, whatever the case may be. Make sure that they are easily accessible, and most importantly, you know how to use them. Just in case somebody does get through your perimeter defenses, you know how to deal with it. And it's important to understand that during many bug-in situations, especially those that involve power outages, fires do increase. You want to have fire extinguishers in your home and make sure that your smoke alarms are working properly. Another note about power outages and how those can relate to security. You need to exercise good light discipline. You don't want to be the only person in your neighborhood with lights when everybody else is living in the Stone Age. That's going to just draw way too much attention to you. Having things like blackout curtains, those are a good idea so that you won't be drawing that unwanted attention to yourself. And one of the most important parts of your bug-in plan is going to be food. Focus on easy to prepare foods Things like canned goods, prepper staples like dried beans and rice, freeze-dried stuff also, although you really are going to get the most bang out of your buck from things like canned goods and storing those dried foods. The freeze-dried stuff, it's good for adding a little bit of variety, but for most people, it's going to be really cost prohibitive to store large quantities of that. But it's also a good idea to have some other foods that maybe don't store quite as long, but you eat a lot of them and you can rotate through them. Things like peanut butter, crackers, but just having something that if you don't want to mess with the camp stove, or maybe you can't for one reason or another, just have some easy foods that you can at least snack on as time goes on. If y'all remember quarantine, or as some people around here called it, quarantine, you remember that probably one of the things that people were going and buying most were snacks. Have some comfort foods that you can munch on to kind of boost your morale a little bit. Then also, while outdoor cooking methods are good and you need to have ways that you can cook outdoors, particularly things that use natural materials like rocket stoves and stuff like that, if we're dealing with a long-term bug-in situation and security is a big concern, having indoor cooking methods is extremely important. Things like butane stoves are good, and butane is one of the fuels that I haven't really noticed it skyrocketing in price. Propane has. Propane's gone up a lot, but the price of the little butane cartridges, the little 8-ounce cans, it's stayed mostly the same. But also alcohol stoves, just little $20 spirit burners with denatured alcohol. Those are relatively safe to use indoors, but when using things like butane stoves, alcohol stoves, any of that kind of stuff indoors, you really need to have things like carbon monoxide detectors nearby, be able to crack a window, then also fire extinguisher, smoke alarms, stuff like that. And I mean, if you have a decently sized solar setup, then you can also run things like electric griddles, maybe even a crock pot. But it's important to understand that when using those kind of devices, they really drain power quickly. And then one area a lot of people overlook is pet food. You need to have stuff for your pets. Sometimes I will buy more food than what I need, and then I'll just put them in 5-gallon buckets. So that way we have plenty of food for our animals as well. Another extremely important part of your bug-in plan is water. You need to have both water stored and the ability to purify more water as you go along. How you store water will depend mainly on your budget and the type of property that you have. If you can't afford things like rainwater catchment, things like big barrels to store water in, then at least try to get yourself some portable water containers. Things like the Aquatainer, they're relatively inexpensive. They can hold around 7 gallons. I like them a lot. Then water bricks are another good option. The military water cans, they're incredibly durable. If they can handle bouncing around on the back of a Humvee in Afghanistan, I think they can handle most of what we would put them through. And if you're on a really tight budget, just packages of water bottles. They're great. If you want to store 1-gallon containers of water, I would avoid the milk jug types. Try to get one of the more sturdy, thicker plastic bottles for that. We like to get the packages of water bottles and then have enough where we have like a few weeks worth that we just rotate through. Those aren't really meant for long-term storage. You really should rotate through them. Then when it comes to water filtration, of course, things like Berkeys and Alexa Pures, they're good options since they're gravity powered. You don't need electricity for them to operate. Their filtering elements last a good while, and really they can remove pretty much everything that we could reasonably expect to need to remove from our water. And if it's just a situation where you still have water utilities, there's still water running through the tap, but you need to boil it, then something like the Sawyer tap filter is a good option as well. Another thing that your bug-in plan should address is maintenance and repair. Basic hand tools, they're a good foundation for that. If you can figure out a way to keep cordless power tools up and running long term, then I think those are a great idea as well, because you might need to make repairs around your house. And then as far as certain hand tools go, you might need special tools for turning off, say, your gas meter, your water meter, things like that. Then you also want to have some lumber and some fasteners, things like nails and screws. You might need those materials to make repairs around your home. And you might also need them to make fortifications. Maybe you need to board up your windows for security, or maybe they just got a hole knocked in them and you need to board them up for that reason. And another thing that's good to have is plastic sheeting and tarps. These have several different uses. First one is repairing things like your window or your roof. If you live near something like a highway or railroad tracks, there could be some sort of accident that results in a chemical spill. Then you can use that plastic sheeting to prevent those contaminants from entering your home. Also, if you are bugging in for a long period of time and one of the members of your family becomes very sick and it's contagious, then you can use plastic sheeting to create sort of a quarantine zone within your home so that hopefully that disease will not spread any further. And another thing that you need to think about, especially when dealing with a long-term bug-in situation, is sanitation. And this becomes a very big concern when water utilities are gone, but you want to have some sort of backup toilet system. Could be something like a camp toilet or even something as simple as a bucket with a pool noodle around the top. Think about what are you going to do with that waste so it's not just sitting in your house. Think, where are you going to bury it? Then also having other things like wet wipes and sanitation wipes. Wet wipes can go a good ways towards helping keep your body clean if you don't have enough water to actually bathe properly. And then sanitation wipes, they can also help save water, but they're better for use on surfaces. The last thing that you want is to basically be living in a cesspool of your own filth for a long period of time, because that's just going to cause you and your family to get sick from things that could easily be prevented. Then also you want to have some pesticides on hand, and then maybe even some animal traps as well. So have different ways of preventing infestations from in the first place, and then also have ways that you can deal with those as you go on. The next area of preparedness that your bug-in plan should include is energy. Gas generators are some people's first go-to for things like that. I think they are very good for short-term situations or maybe the beginning of a situation that lasts a little bit longer term, but they're going to be limited in their long-term usefulness for a couple of reasons. First of all, you're only going to be able to use them for as long as you have fuel for them. Then also, and probably the biggest issue with a long-term situation or even some short-term situations is going to be the sound is an absolutely huge security concern. So I think in a lot of situations, solar is going to be a better option. Now with things like that, you're going to be limited, of course, in the things that you can power. While a lot of solar power setups can power things like refrigerators, it's only going to be for a few hours, so that's going to be useful for long-term powering of things like flashlights with rechargeable batteries, other kinds of rechargeable batteries for things like lanterns, walkie-talkies, all that kind of stuff. And then also things like lighting, but you also got to think about the security aspect with solar too, especially if you have a big array of solar panels. Where are you going to put those where folks can't see them? Because a lot of times if you put your solar panel somewhere where other people can't see them, it's probably obstructed from sunlight. And another good thing to have as far as energy goes is just a bunch of batteries. If you have a solar setup, I would invest more in rechargeable batteries. But if you don't have that, maybe spend a little more money on good traditional like AA's and AAA's so you can keep your devices running as long as possible. Another area that you should include in your bug-in plan is communication. For a lot of people, their first concern is going to be how in the world are they going to keep their phone charged? And having just some battery banks like this one is a good idea. You can charge your phone probably at least 2 or 3 times with something like that. And then solar setups are great for that. Also having a weather radio, something with multiple ways to power it. And also thing about radios like that, especially one that can pick up NOAA weather frequencies, is if those channels start to drop, like, you lose your FM stations or you lose your AM stations and then NOAA's not broadcasting anymore, mess just got real. So kind of reconsider your plan going forward. Then also two-way radios are good. Maybe you want to communicate with your neighbors, or you have a large piece of property and you want to be able to communicate with people from one end to the other. Just know that those aren't secured so people could easily kind of tune in on you. And then also ham radios. If you can get a ham radio license, that's going to open up a whole new world of communication possibilities to you, especially if you can power a larger radio setup. But even some smaller handheld units, you can use them to listen. Do not try to broadcast, because that'll get you in all sorts of trouble if you don't have a license. But you can buy radios where you can pick up those ham radio frequencies, so you can still kind of have an idea of what's going on in the outside world. Another very important part of your bug-in plan revolves around medical situations. How are you going to deal with illnesses and injuries as they happen? And a good way to start with this is just having good basic over-the-counter medications to help you deal with some of the more common situations that crop up. Things like stomach illnesses, cold and flu. I did a video a couple weeks ago that was over-the-counter medications that preppers should store. I'll link to that as well. But also, if you can afford it, try to get yourself some antibiotics. That's really going to open up a whole new world of the different kinds of things that you can treat. And of course, you want to be educated on how to use those. Have a good supply of first aid supplies like triple antibiotic ointment, bandages of different types, maybe also some splints. Then also antiseptics, that's a big one. Isopropyl alcohol, hydrogen peroxide. Another thing is you want to have some respirators, even if it is something as simple as an N95 mask, because if somebody in your home gets sick, there's a very good chance they're going to need somebody to take care of them, even if they are isolated from the rest of the family. So having some breathing protection on you is going to help reduce the chance of you catching that from them, especially if it is spread through respiratory channels. One very overlooked aspect of bugging in is your personal well-being. Having things like books is a great idea. Exercise, even if it's just simple like calisthenic type exercises, keep your body moving so that you don't atrophy. The more that you keep your body moving, the more you keep busy. That's also going to help with the mental aspect as well. Then also you want to have games, things that you can do just by yourself, and then also things that you can do with others as well. Board games are good for this. And the last part of your bug-in plan, and one that is overlooked I think a lot of the times, is an exit strategy. When things get bad enough, how are you going to get out? Because there are certain things like floods, other things like wildfires, that you really can't beat just by staying. So having fuel in your car and then also having supplies in your car is a good idea as well. Park in your garage to keep your vehicle safe and also kind of make it a little bit less obvious, is somebody home or not? And park preferably nose out so that you can just drive out without having to worry about backing up. And if you want to learn more about situations that could require you to bug out, click on this card. Y'all have a good one. Thanks again.